Picture this, 1945. The world is emerging from the shadows of the most devastating conflict in human history. World War II just wrapped. Cities are in ruins, economies are shattered, and millions of lives have been lost. Everyone's a little on edge. The world is holding its breath, hoping for a new beginning but fearing the worst. So naturally, what's the first thing they do? Start a global organization for peace and cooperation. A bold move, right? Because nothing says, we're over it, like signing a charter with 50 other countries. It's like a massive peace treaty, but with more paperwork and handshakes. That, my friends, was the UN's grand entrance, a beacon of hope in a world desperate for stability. Now you might be thinking, the UN? Isn't that where diplomats go to argue in fancy hats? Well, you're not entirely wrong. Well, yes, but it's also much more. It's a place where nations come together to tackle the world's biggest problems, from poverty to climate change. Think of it as the world's most ambitious group project. Everyone has their own ideas, and getting them to agree is like herding cats. Everyone agrees it's important, but no one wants to do the work. And there's always that one kid looking at you, Security Council, who tries to run the whole show. It's a delicate balance of power and diplomacy. Still, for all its flaws, the UN is kind of a big deal. It's been instrumental in peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and fostering international cooperation. It's like the friend who keeps inviting you to parties even though you know deep down it'll probably involve some awkward conversations and maybe a spilled drink or two, but you go because you believe in the cause. You keep showing up because, hey, you never know, right? Maybe this time, things will be different. Maybe this time, the world will finally get it right. So, what exactly does the UN do? Well, their mission statement is basically a laundry list of things everyone wants, but no one can quite agree on how to achieve. Think world peace, human rights, economic development, the whole shebang. Now you might be thinking, that sounds optimistic. And you'd be right. But hey, you gotta give them points for aiming high, plus they have had some wins. Take peacekeeping, for example. They send these brave folks in blue helmets to places where things have gone sideways to, keep the peace. It's like the world's most awkward family reunion, but with fewer casseroles and more landmines. Of course, it's not all sunshine and blue helmets. The UN has had its fair share of controversies and failures, but we'll get to that later. Let's rewind the clock to 1950. North Korea decides to play a little game of whose peninsula is it anyway, and invades South Korea. Cue the UN, dramatic music swelling in the background. This, my friends, was the UN's first big test. And guess what? They passed. Sort of. They sent in troops, pushed back the North Koreans, and managed to avoid a full-blown World War III. Not bad for a bunch of diplomats who probably spent more time arguing over the wording of resolutions than practicing their combat skills. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The UN has had its share of interventions that, shall we say, didn't quite go according to plan. Think the Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian War, the list goes on. These were dark chapters, reminders that even with the best of intentions, the UN can sometimes be powerless to prevent tragedy. Section 4, Cold Wars, Hot Messes, and the Quest for World Peace, or at least, a draw. The Cold War was a tense time, kind of like that moment when you're trying to sneak a snack from the fridge at 3 in the morning, and you think you hear your parents coming. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable, not just in the corridors of power, but in everyday life. People built bomb shelters in their backyards, schools held duck-and-cover drills, and the threat of nuclear annihilation loomed large over every aspect of society. The US and the Soviet Union were locked in a global staring contest, each side armed with enough nukes to turn the planet into a radioactive wasteland. It was a high-stakes game of chicken, with both superpowers racing to outdo each other in an arms race that seemed to have no end. The world watched in fear as the two giants flexed their military muscles, each test and missile launch bringing us closer to the brink of disaster. The UN, stuck in the middle, was like the awkward third wheel trying to keep everyone from doing anything rash. They were the peacekeepers, the mediators, the ones trying to keep the lines of communication open. It was a thankless job, often met with frustration and limited success, but it was crucial. The UN's role was to provide a platform for dialogue, a place where grievances could be aired and solutions could be sought, even if it felt like they were just putting out fires. They couldn't exactly tell the superpowers to play nice, so they did the next best thing. They provided a forum for dialogue. a place where the US and the Soviets could at least yell at each other through diplomats instead of launching missiles. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring patience, diplomacy, and a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations. The UN's efforts may not have always been visible, but they were vital in preventing the Cold War from turning hot. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. It was the end of an era, a moment of triumph for those who had longed for peace and stability. The images of the Berlin Wall coming down, of people celebrating in the streets, symbolized a new beginning. The Cold War was over, and the threat of nuclear war receded, giving way to a new set of challenges and opportunities. The UN, no longer playing referee in a nuclear standoff, could finally focus on other pressing issues like, all those things in their mission statement. From humanitarian aid to peacekeeping missions, from development projects to environmental initiatives, the UN had a chance to make a real difference in the world. Their work was far from over, but the end of the Cold War allowed them to redirect their efforts towards building a better, more peaceful future for all. Section 5, Human Rights, Tree Hugging, and Other Non-War Stuff. So, we've talked about the UN's role in peacekeeping and preventing nuclear annihilation. But what about all that other stuff? The human rights, the environmental protection, the whole making the world a better place thing? Well, believe it or not, the UN actually does a lot in these areas. They've got agencies dedicated to everything from fighting poverty and hunger to promoting education and gender equality. They've even got a guy whose official title is Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. You've made it when you have a UN Special Rapporteur on speed dial. They've also been instrumental in tackling global issues like climate change and disease outbreaks. Remember Ebola? Yeah, the UN was on the front lines of that fight too. Section 6. Okay, but what about that time? The UN under fire. The UN, with its noble goals and ambitious agenda, is an easy target for criticism. Founded in 1945, the organization was meant to foster international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. Some say it's ineffective, bogged down by bureaucracy and infighting. Critics point to the slow decision-making processes and the frequent deadlocks in the Security Council. Others argue it's biased, too beholden to powerful countries. The veto power held by the 5 permanent members often skews decisions in favor of their national interests. And let's not forget those scandals, like that time peacekeepers were accused of sexual abuse. Such incidents have severely tarnished the UN's reputation. Or that other time a certain oil for food program went sideways, leading to allegations of corruption and mismanagement. Look, the UN isn't perfect. It's a massive organization with a complex structure, and it's bound to have its share of problems. It's made up of humans, and humans, as we all know, are inherently flawed. Mistakes are inevitable, but so are efforts to correct them. But here's the thing, the UN is all we've got. Despite its flaws, it remains the only global organization capable of addressing issues that transcend borders. It's the only global organization with the mandate and the potential to address the world's most pressing challenges. From climate change to human rights, the UN plays a crucial role. So instead of just pointing fingers and complaining, maybe we should be asking ourselves how we can help make it better. Active participation and constructive criticism can drive meaningful change. Because let's face it, a world without the UN is like a party without a designated driver. Messy, unpredictable, and likely to end in disaster. The stakes are too high for us to simply stand by and watch. Section 7. The future's so bright, the UN needs shades. So, what does the future hold for the UN? Well, if the past is any indication, it's going to be complicated. The world is facing some pretty big challenges. Climate change, global inequality, that weird stain on the break room microwave that no one wants to claim. The UN, for all its flaws, is still the best hope we've got for tackling these issues. But to be effective, it needs to adapt, to become more efficient, more transparent, and more accountable. It needs to find ways to bridge the divides between nations, to build consensus, and to act decisively. In other words, the UN needs to get its act together, because the future of the planet might just depend on it. No pressure.